All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're zeroing in on a really critical moment in a high-stakes standoff. It's day 23 of the Iran conflict, and right now, all eyes are on the Strait of Hormuz. This is where the tension between diplomacy and military action, well, it's pretty much reached a boiling point.
So here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll look at why this conflict is at a crossroads. Then, we'll dive into the very different signals coming from the US and Iran. After that, we'll see how the rest of the world is reacting, and then, and this is key, we'll get grounded in the military reality of what's happening before we pull it all together to figure out what might happen next.
Okay, so on day 23, everything really boils down to one central question. Are we actually seeing the first real steps toward de-escalation, through talks? Or is this just the quiet before the storm, a pause before a much bigger conflict kicks off? And honestly, the answer completely depends on who you ask.
Let's start with the official US position. Publicly, the message they're putting out there is all about optimism and progress. US leadership is really pushing this narrative that diplomatic engagement isn't just a possibility, it's happening, and it's working.
U.S. officials are on record calling these discussions very strong and productive. But the biggest signal, the real tangible thing here, is the decision to pause planned military strikes for about 5 days. Now, this isn't just a random lull. It's being framed as the first meaningful pause, specifically designed to give diplomacy a chance to work. It's basically a real concrete olive branch.
But just when you think you see a path opening up for diplomacy, you hit a brick wall. Iran's public story is not just a little different, it's the complete opposite. They're telling a story of strength, not a story of negotiation.
And this slide just perfectly illustrates the core mystery of what's going on. On one side, you have the US talking about productive discussions. On the other, Iran categorically denies any direct negotiations are happening. The US says the pause in strikes is to allow for talks. Iran calls it a deterrence success, claiming the US backed down. So, are they talking or not? The truth is probably somewhere in the middle, deniable backchannel stuff. But this public clash of stories, it's all about managing their credibility, both for people back home and for everyone watching around the world.
So with the two main players locked in this, let's call it a war of words, the rest of the world is definitely not just sitting on the sidelines. The Strait of Hormuz is a vital artery for the entire global economy. And you better believe other major powers are making their positions crystal clear.
You've got this multinational coalition, more than 20 countries, all speaking with one voice. And their message is simple. Any threats to shipping are completely unacceptable. Their focus is all about protecting maritime trade, and they've made it known they are ready to conduct security operations if they have to. And behind the scenes, you've got the regional Gulf states quietly siding with this defensive posture.
Then you have Russia weighing in. They're warning that any kind of escalation could spark chaos in global energy markets and just cause this whole conflict to spin out of control. Now, their position is framed as being anti-escalation, sure, but it also has a pretty clear anti-Western vibe to it. They're against any kind of blockade or restrictions in the area.
And in a similar vein, you've got China pushing really hard for de-escalation. Their officials are warning about a vicious cycle of conflict. For China, this is about one thing above all else: stability. They need to protect the flow of energy that fuels their economy, so they're working all the diplomatic channels to try and calm things down without getting their own hands dirty.
Okay, so we've heard all the diplomatic talk. Now we have to shift our focus from what everyone is saying to what is actually happening. Because out on the water, the military reality is a very, very different story.
And this, right here, is probably the single most important takeaway from a military point of view. Despite all the talk, all the signals, all the diplomatic maneuvering, the hard facts at sea haven't changed one bit. The risk today is just as high as it was yesterday.
And here's why that risk is so high. U.S. intelligence suggests that Iranian naval mines are already in the strait. Iran keeps openly threatening more mining operations and even attacks on infrastructure in the region. And in response to all that, the coalition forces, they aren't standing down. They're staying on high alert, ready for anything. The chess pieces are still very much on the board, ready for a fight.
So how in the world do we make sense of these two conflicting realities? You've got diplomatic hope on one side and this intense military tension on the other. Well, the best way to understand Day 23 is to see it as a dual-track moment, where two completely separate stories are unfolding at the exact same time.
See, on one track, you've got diplomacy. This is where you have these possible early-stage backchannel talks, and they're being amplified by a global push from other countries to de-escalate. But running right alongside that, you have the military track. And on that track, forces are on high alert,
The threat of mines is very real, and the risk to shipping is extremely high. The conflict is at this bizarre intersection where both tracks are moving forward, and either one could completely derail the other at any moment.
So this brings us to the final, absolutely crucial question. The next 24 to 72 hours, they are going to be decisive. Is this fragile diplomatic track going to be strong enough to slow things down? Or will some incident at sea, a miscalculation, an accident, an attack, make all of this talk completely irrelevant? That is the razor's edge that we are on right now.